Let me begin. First of all, thank you for inviting UNV, and good morning to all the Volunteering Australia members, distinguished participants of the National Volunteering Conference, and the volunteers. Uh, for me, I think I take our interaction today as a learning opportunity as well. While I'll speak about the future is now for volunteering, but hopefully with the questions, I'll also be able to learn also from the other panelist member more. Let me begin by informing about UN volunteers. It's the volunteering arm of the United Nations administered by UNDP. I'm now talking to you from New York, but our headquarters are based in Bonn, in Germany. In last year, in 2022, UNV sent around 12,000 UN volunteers that have served with 55 UN entities. They all represented 177 nationalities, and they served in 163 countries and territories. Most of the volunteers, 84%, they come from Global South, and 55% of them are women. And increasingly, we see most of the volunteers, UN volunteers, are nationals, which means they serve within their home countries. Now, I think the topic for the discussion, or the topic given to me, is about future of volunteering. So allow me to share some of the challenges or the changes that may persist in future, and which, according to us, may define the future of volunteering. And this is also based on the work we did during the Global Technical Meeting on Volunteering in 2020, which was hosted by UNV. First of all, the first point on the challenges, the climate emergency. I think in Australia, you know very well, and the same globally widely accepted, that climate change represents humanity's biggest challenge. The climate crisis is a threat multiplier. And interestingly, we must understand the people who are most vulnerable and have the least resources to adapt, especially those in fragile contexts, will bear the brunt of the impact of the climate emergency. The climate-related disasters claimed, according to the data we saw between 1998 and 2017, around 1.3 million lives, and most of these occurring in low and middle-income countries. Further, climate change will put food production at risk. We know that, leading to widespread food shortages and hunger. Potentially, it will displace up to 140 million people by 2050. And according to an International Displacement Monitor Center, in 2017, there were around 18.8 million new disaster-related internal displacements recorded, which we believe in the years, and right now, when we know what is happening in the area in Turkey and Syria, the numbers only grow year by year. This radically changing ecosystem forces us to rethink social solidarity and volunteering, especially in terms of crisis, when we are talking about future of volunteering. Where the government and public institutions are unable to deliver social services, we rely on humanitarian volunteers, then to be at the front line. The second, although not so much as a challenge, but it depends how and which lens you look at it, is the digital age, the digital renaissance, or like the strategy in volunteering says, the technology. Increased internet access means improvements in a range of categories and channels, and it has helped make governments more responsive to the citizens' concerns. However, I hope the participants would agree, internet technology inequality is growing, and only those who can afford to be online can thrive. The rise of automation. I see that there is also discussion on future of work. The rise of automation has long been associated with concerns about increased job losses and future of work. However, the evidence is increasingly pointing to more jobs as a result of fourth industrial revolution as well. But it's the matching of the skills, the upgrading of skills, that is of more importance. COVID-19 since 2019-20 has brought to the foreground the digital initiatives that only some years ago or some months ago, we could only think of those on the sidelines. Working from home, it is probably, you can say, it's the world's largest experiment everywhere and all the countries. The digital transformation process of the governments and institutions have had to adapt to it. Regardless of technology impact on workflows, I think it's the social fabric that keeps connectivity going. So even when we talk of technology, we have to think of the social connectivity aspects, and the digital growth points to a challenge to the traditional, we believe, linear approaches to civic engagement. as emerging technologies are democratizing access to information and participation. While, like I said, access to information and technology also is a challenge that persists. The third, I hope you will agree again that the persistent inequalities, if you look at the SDGs achievement in the first 2 decades of the 21st century, remarkable progress has been made to reduce extreme deprivation. However, poverty, hunger, disease, they continue to be concentrated in the poorest and the most vulnerable groups of people and countries. Extreme poverty rate in rural areas, in most cases, you will find they are either 2 or 3 times higher than in the urban areas. If you look at some of the data, more than 90% of maternal deaths occur in low and middle countries. 3/4 of children may be stunted in Southern Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa. Women and girls perform disproportionate share of unpaid domestic work and lack autonomy in decision making. However, fragile economic conditions, limited or non-existent access to healthcare systems, and poverty, these are powerful incentives for people to help one another and find a common voice. Since I was invited to the panel to think about, future of volunteering, we call it reimagining volunteering. So despite the uncertainty that I have said we are facing collectively, there are signs of ways forward. People from all walks of life, particularly young, and Mo will talk about it. Civil society actors in many countries are channeling their anxieties in social action. I'm sure you know about Fridays for Future climate strikes. More than 6 million students from 150 countries participated. COVID-19 also has brought people together in unprecedented surge of voluntary efforts. Different countries, just to give you an example, in Tunisia, more than 10,000 people joined Facebook group to bring together volunteers to help fight the virus. In many countries, groups of businesses and volunteers have delivered respirators and other protective equipment to healthcare workers. We have also shared an update on volunteers working in health emergencies. It is on our website, and we have documented different instances of innovative ways that volunteers groups along with businesses, private sector, civil society, and governments have come together to supply equipment, etc. during COVID. People are moving away. I think we need to consider that they are moving away from institutional loyalty, or what we call formal volunteering, in favor of causes and issues closest to their heart. So you might have heard of micro volunteering, episodic volunteering, basically shorter period of time, but the issues or the causes that they empathize with or they can relate to the volunteers. We need to ask, how can we reimagine structures and enabling environments to help build coalitions across these networks to foster connectedness and inclusion of those that are most affected? Let me just bring in 3 points before I conclude. 3 points, I think, how the future of volunteering may shape up and what it can do, rather, what we hope it can do. First is to help amplify social action. We think that one of the key determinants of any state's ability to mitigate of any crisis is through ability to mobilize different segments of its society to respond to crisis, not only a whole of government approach, but whole of society approach. Just to give, again, I will dwell upon a COVID example. In the Voluntary National Review, the government of Kazakhstan in 2022, last year, at the high-level political forum here in New York, they reported that more than 1 million Kazakhs joined the volunteer movement to help more than 1.5 million citizens in the form of food baskets, life essential sets, protective personal equipment, and providing medical facilities, oxygen concentrated, etc. We need to ask, can the new form or reimagine or future of volunteering help redesign social policies to ensure people normally on the receiving end of services are not helpless beneficiaries. Rather, they are active participants in the systems that govern their lives. I would also encourage you and the participants to read the SWVR's, the State of World Volunteering Report 2022, we released, which focuses a lot on government civil society action. The second is on volunteering to harness a digital civil society. Like I just said, technology is here. It has been accelerated during COVID, a lot of innovations happening, and a digital civil society where citizens and civil society actors can actively shape the digital public realm is, we think, gradually taking root. UNV itself is running a UNV, an online volunteering service which matches the skills and needs. So matching of the skills and needs or demands is also one of the things in future for volunteering to thrive is important. However, I think like Volunteering Australia, like UNB, all the volunteering organizations, we need to think, how can civil society support more people in a world where technology, both it individualizes, it is less, it's not equitably accessible to everyone. However, it connects individuals, families, workers, learners, whole of communities. Whose voices matter and how does digital society, civil society help that? Who and what needs protecting? I think volunteering plays an intrinsic role in digital civil society connecting the social fabric. And the third, I shared with you on the part of inequalities. We call in UN, we call it social inclusion, inclusion of the marginalized, inclusion of those that are left behind or those that are the farthest behind. Now we need to ask, could reimagined volunteering be a key accelerator for inclusive growth? It should encourage, like I said before, whole of society engagement rather than only whole of government engagement. We see some evidences of it gradually moving ahead. Jamaica, in its Voluntary National Review Report 2022, it reported of tripling of engagement of communities seeking mental health support through a Ministry of Health initiative, which comprised mainly of volunteers trained in use of psychological first aid. In Mali, again, in its Voluntary National Review in 2022, the government reported that it deployed volunteers under a project called Spotlight to assist the victims of gender-based violence. So engaging volunteers in different aspects of the needs of society, but in a whole of society approach might be something important going forward. Accelerating inclusion also means making access more even. Valuing ways people contribute, protecting them when their contribution puts them in harm's way. I see that the National Strategy on Volunteering also talks about well-being of the volunteers, but we need to think more. Regardless of whether volunteering is on the front line of emergency, crisis response, or capability building to future-proof skill sets, but we need to rethink how social safety nets to reduce the barriers of participation can be made. I think the future, this is a panel on future, so future we face are complex as a society. There are multiple cluster of interrelated problems, but to face them we need a multiple cluster of interrelated networked solution. And that's where the different aspects of volunteering that I just narrated brings those. I think volunteering can be a catalyst to achieve the SDGs. Now, in the end, I wanted to share with you how this is also happening. In 2020, quadrennial comprehensive policy review of the operational activities of the development of United Nations system, a QCPR in short, it is easier to pronounce, for me at least, they recognize, the member states through the QCPR in 2020 recognized that volunteerism can be a powerful and cross-cutting means for implementation of the 2030 agenda. It is now to be embedded, and UNV works to embed volunteering or integrate volunteering into the strategy documents of United Nations at the country level and also at the global policy level. And just to share with you, United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Frameworks are one-stop arrangements or the most important documents of the correlation between the governments and the United Nations work in that particular country, through which UN provides support or works together with the national governments to achieve the national objectives defined in their national development plans. Around 40% of the cooperation frameworks in 2022 had integrated volunteerism based on the tracking that we did, and most of them were on SDG 1 on ending poverty, on SDG 3 for healthy lives and well-being, SDG 8 on youth skills development, and SDG 17 on partnerships. Similarly, through UN, we also promote integration of volunteering into the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, UNICEF, UNFPA country program documents, because they are the ones who implement these programs and initiatives, and we found varying degree of integration from 7% in UNICEF to 24% in UNDP country program documents. Volunteering was integrated. And again, focusing mainly on SDG 1 on ending poverty, on SDG 17 and SDG 3. So overall, I would say if you look at the canvas, there are challenges. If volunteering is addressing the challenges which are going to persist, or is poised to adapt itself, like the technology advancements, etc., to be able to address those societal challenges. I think the future of volunteering is good. I would have said bright, but it is definitely good. Over to you, and I hope this was useful. I'm open to any further questions.
Now, despite living through a couple of years of using technology to connect, unfortunately, we haven't been able to get Mo from the UK on. So we'll move straight to Q&A, and I'll quickly pop back to the slide that I'm not meant to press the button. This is the one plenary I'm not allowed to touch things. Here we go. It's the same Slido link as yesterday, but I would love to keep the energy up for people in the room to ask questions. And I can see one here. Do we have a mic runner? Oh. Thank you very much. I'm just going to assume someone who will be able to fix that has heard that. People online cannot get access to the saying live stream is unavailable. The best laid plans, folks. But down here, and I'll get you if I'm just going to grab a microphone for you for the recording. Is that okay? I will just find out where a microphone is. I'm looking around, because there isn't one. All right, you go and I will repeat it. So if you keep it really short so I don't misquote you. Yeah. Yep.
Volunteering.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're good now, Mark. So to our wonderful folks sounding lighting out the back, if we could pull Narendra back up. It was a really good question about the impacts of COVID and what internationally organisations and volunteer organisations are doing to assist people who have suffered trauma through COVID and other crises around the world. So Narendra, if we can pull you back up, do you have any reflections on?
Okay. Let me ask, I represent UN volunteers, so I would bias my answers mostly coming from United Nations. I hope you are fine with it. And let me attempt to answer that. Just when COVID struck, or at the beginning of the COVID itself, of course, there were many challenges globally in many countries, and people were trying to adapt. One of the first few things that UN, and not only UNV, UN as a collective, it did was it tried to understand the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 on the populations. So let's say on the economy, on civil society, etc. And they based that to a COVID response plan as well at the country level. Now, these over a period of time, we are now beginning of 2023, COVID persists, different levels, but what we have seen is that we have now what we call UN reform. In that UN reform, I have touched upon a document called United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Frameworks. So COVID response has been part or ingrained into the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Frameworks, which basically means the national governments and the United Nations entities work together in response to COVID. Now that is at a planning or a policy level. In terms of specific response examples, UNV itself can tell, and these are over a period of time. So in Peru, we had more than 200,000 volunteers we mobilized with the government for, you can say, engaging with at-home populations, especially those that were marginalized, as we say, old aging populations where it was needed to just check, you know, if they are doing okay, fine, if they needed medicines, etc. So, but the whole thing or network was done through telephones or let's say communication networks, not individually going in those examples. In other cases, UNV and similarly other UN entities, they mobilized immediate, face masks, the kind of responses in relation to livelihoods as well. So they ranged from immediate, when it was at the beginnings of the COVID, to immediate response, providing food supplies, ensuring medicines and other protective equipment related supplies to volunteers and to communities, but later on further transformed into a long-term sustainable solutions through the cooperation framework. So specific solution designed as part of the government interventions. So this is how I can explain to you. And I hope by international organizations, you met United Nations, but of course, Red Cross and many other organizations, many have done, and I'm sure you are as well aware about the different interventions post-COVID. Over to you.
Thanks, Narendra. And I've got a really good question that's come through online that lots of people are upvoting, which is, do you have any advice on how to measure impact and align our programs to the Sustainable Development Goals? In your experience, would this help us to recruit cause-motivated volunteers?
Yeah, thank you for the question. UNV, okay, so there are two answers to it, two parts to the answer. One, you mentioned measurement. Now, UNV is working with ILO, has already worked with ILO before on a methodology for measurement of volunteering. The major premise in that, and the manual is available on UNV's website. There is a portal. I'll type in into the chat after when I am not speaking just now, which is knowledge.unv.org. It's a knowledge portal, and where we have collected data, country level researches, and on measurement of volunteering. So there is a measurement toolkit which advises the organizations which are interested in measurement of volunteering. Now, as I said in the beginning, there are two aspects to it. One, measurement vis-a-vis SDGs, and there is a social and economic aspects of measurement. Social aspects are more, how would I say, qualitative in nature. So it is difficult perhaps sometimes to quantify. To build a direct correlation. I gave you some data, like if a certain number of maternal mortality is happening in a particular country, is volunteering helping reduce that maternal mortality from, let's say, 90 per 1,000 to 90 per 100,000 to, let's say, 60 or 30. So that kind of an attribution, it is tough. It is challenging, but this is something that we ourselves are trying to work upon, and we are in a new phase after the first initial manual on measurement of volunteering. The second aspect is measurement of volunteering in general. Of course, it can be done. As an organization, of course, you can look at the kind of initiatives which are for a particular SDG from 1 to 17, and you can then quantify, the needs of that particular area, localized area, because SDG achievement at national and global levels, perhaps it is difficult to quantify, but at the local area, you can definitely look at the, what are the current figures or what are the time series data of those figures, if there is a challenge for a particular SDG, and measure after your intervention, after 1 year or 2 years, what is the impact? So there are various methods to it, but I would highly encourage, to look at our knowledge portal and the measurement toolkit, and it tells, we invited government and civil society organizations as well to inform about different approaches to measurement. In addition to, of course, what we have worked with ILO, and we are at the moment working further. The next SWVR, we might even go much deeper into measurement aspects of volunteering, which will come into next year or the year after. I hope it helps answer.
Thanks, Narendra. Any other questions in the room? Yes, down here. Do we have a mic runner? We had a microphone. All right. Are you happy to yell? And I will repeat the question.
what strategies are in place to address?
Sorry, I meant to repeat the question for the recording. I'm so sorry. I'm looking at Slido because there's another really good question to ask next and I've lost it, about informal volunteering. The question was around volunteer fatigue, Narendra, and whether you've noticed volunteer fatigue happening in an international development context and what volunteer involving organisations are doing about that.
Yeah, so there are, just give me 1 second. I'm trying to copy paste the, okay, the link of the website, but let me first answer this. I think this got, okay. Volunteer fatigue. It depends, you know, how you look at it. As far as UNV is concerned, we have seen the numbers of UN volunteers growing, the numbers of individuals interested to volunteer with or as UN volunteer growing. We maintain a roster. We maintain also an online volunteering portal where increasingly individuals are registering themselves to volunteer, and there are increasingly more number of volunteering opportunities being posted. So on the one hand, I would say as an organization, as far as UNV is concerned, we only see the numbers on the incline. In general about volunteering fatigue, I think during our researches, what we have found, it also depends upon the way volunteering is perceived in different country contexts at the local level. It impacts the volunteers, what volunteers expect. Like I said, there is more of episodic or micro volunteering perhaps and informal volunteering happening because individuals are more empathizing with the causes and directly engaging than what an organized formal volunteering brings to them. So you can think volunteering fatigue from that, if that was the intent, that if the organized volunteering is not growing in the same manner as informal volunteering is growing. Informal volunteering in any way represents more than 70% of volunteering. If there are, and according to our SWVR research itself, there are 1 billion people who volunteer, and out of that, more than 70% are informal volunteers. But volunteering fatigue, probably it would be best to answer from the perspective of what is the need, what do they need, and whether they are protected as much, and what are the kind of issues that are presented to them. No doubt that there is a greater amount of expectation from the volunteers towards the volunteering organizations. But if you look in general, the volunteering numbers increasing. Country to country, the context may be different, and I have been in countries where volunteering does not sit very high, even in civil society. So there the volunteers, not only the fatigue, but their interest to volunteer, individuals' interest to volunteer could be challenging.
Thanks, Narendra, and it's a perfect segue to one of the most upvoted questions we've had around informal volunteering, which is that you spoke of the need to put supports around informal volunteering. How have you been exploring ways to do this without turning this into a formal structure, which I think is the million-dollar question when it comes to that sometimes invisible divide between formal and informal volunteering? Narendra?
Sorry, I was...
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
you might have a bit of a lag there. I'm not sure if you heard.
Yeah, I did hear. This is a challenging thing, isn't it? For all volunteering organizations. As UNV, we do not promote, we do not promote one over the other, meaning we equally value formal volunteering and informal volunteering. In our researches, we bring out both. One of the ways that UNV is also trying to promote, let's say, informal volunteering, or so that it is not left behind, is that when I talked about the integration of volunteering in the UN cooperation frameworks, we speak about the ways that communities, the community volunteers or community groups, volunteering can engage with the UN entities or with the initiatives locally at the community level, which can bring their needs or priorities into the planning or decision making by the governments, especially at the local level, in the local plans, in the local initiatives. Now, that does not mean that this is only promoted organization-based volunteering. This is promoted through organization-based volunteering. At the same time, when we work on the, now we are not working as much because we see that there is a great number of member states which have promulgated laws, legislations, or policies on promoting volunteerism. And whenever we have worked on those laws, policies, we have advocated for protection, promotion, recognition of volunteers and volunteering, which applies as much to informal volunteers as it would apply to organization-based volunteers. So we ensure that these policies are not focusing only on organization-based volunteers or volunteering.
Thank you so much, Narendra. And I think a lot that we can learn in the informal volunteering context here in Australia, although I know we had a big breakout on that yesterday, which is recorded for anyone who missed it, that I heard was very good. That's all we have time for with our international panel of one. Please join me in thanking Narendra for dialing in from New York.
Thank you so much. I hope it was useful.